In this video, I'm going to talk about specifically the Kharkov offensive or counteroffensive or whatever it's being called that the Zelensky regime forces carried out over the last few days. I'm here in Kharkov, so I should know. The Ukrainian armed forces, or the Zelensky regime forces, as I prefer to call them, pushed the Russians. And indeed, in some areas pushed them out, and other areas the Russians simply withdrew, and the Zelensky regime forces simply took over empty ground. But be that as it may, they did push the Russians back. They did create a salient insofar as their advances are concerned. A salient that came awfully close to the Russian border. The Ukrainians claim that it was actually the Russian border. There's video evidence saying that they actually stole a border post and moved it to get the photo op, so I don't really know, man. But anyway, be that as it may. It doesn't mean anything. It's as simple as that. The Russians, they saw this offensive coming, and they pulled back. Oh, they had a fighting retreat in some areas. In other areas, they just lickety-split moved out. But they didn't really lose men, now did they? And they didn't seem to have lost any weapons either. But the important thing is the men. They didn't lose men. They lost ground, a little bit. Did it affect their operational their operational framework? No, it didn't, because this offensive was going towards Belgorod, and more importantly, the road from Belgorod to Izium, where the supplies are flowing, the supplies of fuel and ammunition and weapons and tanks and all the rest of it, that the Russians need, of course, to keep on with the offensive in the northern Donbass. And so the Ukrainian forces came out of their defensive posture around Kharkov and moved forward and captured this ground, even as the Russians were pulling back. Now, a number of commentators have said that this was actually a classic move by the Mongols. The Mongol Empire, in the 13th century, one of their favorite strategies was to attack and then pull back. And as they pulled back, the opposing army would come out of its defenses and attack the Mongols. And the Mongols then would counterattack and eat them. Because what the real purpose was to bring their enemy out of their defensive posture. The Ukrainians had been trying to goad the Russian forces. I wish I could show you a map, but you're just going to have to look up a map while you're listening to me. The Ukrainian forces had been trying to goad the Russian forces outside of Belgorod to advance on the city of Kharkov and try to take the city. But the Russians are too clever for that, because they realize that they need all kinds of forces to take Kharkov. Kharkov is a big city. I live here. And so the Russians didn't take the bait. And the Ukrainians had created a defensive belt around the city of Kharkov and also around the city of Chuguyev. And they were trying to goad the Russians into attacking. That didn't happen, so they did this counteroffensive that coincided with the May 9th celebrations and whatnot. It was designed to cause a PR victory and a military victory. But anyway, what happened was that the Zelensky regime forces advanced. They came out of their defensive posture. They advanced. They've taken all this ground. And now they don't know what to do with it, because they don't have enough men and material to go out and actually cut the supply line from Belgorod to Izium. And the Russians have reinforced it. And so it's sort of like hanging steady, but there's this Zelensky regime force salient that is kind of like doing nothing rather. They have all this captured territory, but it's not doing anything. And they're losing men. And on top of that, what they decided to do, which I don't quite understand it, to tell you the truth, is that they had this successful offensive, okay? And the objective was to cut the supply line, and it's very respectable. But then once they came to a pause, they withdrew their best fighters and sent the fighters south to the Battle of the Donbass, where the soldiers there are getting chewed up every day, inch by inch. They took their best soldiers out of Kharkov, shipped them to the Donbass, to the northern Donbass, and replaced those soldiers with territorial defense forces who are basically militiamen. They're local men, older men, under-equipped, under-trained, and poorly led to sort of like make up the gap there. And you're like, what the hell, man? You had this offensive that made some sense. And rather than push forward and take advantage of it, you decided to like, okay, we push the Russians back. So now we're going to swap out our best guys for, I don't want to put them down. They're brave men, but they're not the best men. And we're going to take out our best men and send them to a meat grinder. So what the hell are you doing? Huh? The Zelensky regime has this habit of doubling down on losing bets. See, in the Donbass, weeks ago, they should have withdrawn all their forces. Instead of that, they've reinforced those forces, trying to defend their position. And in the Donbass, what's going on is that in every single part of the Donbass, it's being, this side, sorry, insofar as you're seeing it, in the Donbass, it's basically, think of the Russians are like jaws, like this. And the Ukrainians keep putting more and more men and material here. But it doesn't matter because this jaw is closing tight and chopping up and eating up and just spitting out these poor men, killing them, annihilating them, and destroying their equipment and everything. And the Zelensky regime keeps throwing its best men into the worst places where they're losing and taking away their best men from the offenses where something could actually be done, something could actually be achieved. And on top of that, it turns out the Russians, right, they were potentially vulnerable insofar as their supply lines from Belgorod to Izium, but what the Russians have kind of sneakily done, surreptitiously done, is to the east of Izium, where like Izium is like around here, to the east of it over here, they secured this area, so now they can get supplies from Western Russia, from a different direction. They don't really need Belgorod anymore, bottom line, okay? And so what the hell are the Zelensky regime forces doing? The only thing that they are doing is throwing away men. And the rationale is to buy time. Okay, buy time for what? Why are you buying time? What is the point of buying time? Because you buy time because you think that something will happen that will be to your benefit. What is that? Is it a false flag that will trigger NATO? Is it weapons, wonder weapons that you think are coming from the West that will save your day? What are you waiting for? And it looks like that salient that the Zelensky regime forces captured, or created rather, around Kharkov. It's a salient that has no purpose. It's a victory that means nothing, that doesn't advance your strategic goals. It seems to me that the Zelensky regime is militarily incompetent. Whoever is running their army, and I do not believe it's the Zelensky regime, I think it's the imbeciles in the Pentagon. They are throwing away lives for nothing. For nothing. I hope that when this conflict is over, we find out exactly who the people were who made these military decisions that are pointless and stupid. I hope we find out, because those men, they must be tried and they must be punished. They must be brought to justice, because fine Ukrainian soldiers, men with families, men who are decent and hardworking and brave as can be, are dying for nothing. There is nothing to be won. It's over. It's been over for weeks. And yet more and more Ukrainian men are being thrown to their deaths. And this is the thing that just breaks my heart.